Welcome to the Journal Editorial Report. I'm Paul Gigot. A House committee voted last week to condemn the mass killings of Armenians in Turkey in World War I as an act of genocide, despite warnings from the White House that the vote would severely strain relations with one of our most important Iraq War allies. Following the vote, Turkey recalled its ambassador to the U.S., and officials there warn that if the resolution is approved by the full House, they will reconsider their support for the American war effort, which includes permission to move essential supplies through Turkey into northern Iraq. Democratic Congressman Adam Schiff of California is the author of the Armenian Genocide Resolution. He has more than 70,000 ethnic Armenians in his Los Angeles district. Congressman, welcome. Good to have you on the program.
Thanks, Paul. Nice to join you.
This atrocity occurred 90 years ago. Why should the U.S. Congress bring it up now, make a statement on it now, at this delicate moment in the Middle East?
Well, Paul, you have to put this in perspective. We've been trying to recognize the genocide really for years, even for decades. We introduced this resolution before the Iraq War, and the administration said, you know, now's not a good time. We introduced the resolution before the war in Afghanistan. The administration said it wasn't a good time. Before 9/11, and said it wasn't a good time. I stood yesterday in the Capitol Rotunda and watched the president bestow the Medal of Honor on the Dalai Lama. And you know something, Paul? I was proud of him. I was proud of him doing that, notwithstanding the fact that China protested, that it was deeply offensive to our strategic partner in China. And someone asked him, Mr. President, why are you risking antagonizing China? Earlier in the day, the president at a news conference said that preventing Iran from getting a nuclear weapon could be so important that it might stop World War III. Well, Paul, you know whose vote we need on the Security Council to prevent Iran from getting the bomb? We need China's vote. But you know something? The president said that when America stands up for human rights and freedom, America is always serving its national interest. The president was right then. But the president believes that the situation in Tibet, the invasion that took place 50 years ago, it's important to recognize what took place in China, but not what took place in Turkey, even though it involved the murder of 1.5 million people.
But
that doesn't make sense to me.
Congressman, the current dispute in Tibet is actually ongoing. It's about human rights in Tibet now.
And you know something, Paul?
This resolution is 100 years ago.
The dispute going on is important now as well. Just last week, Turkey brought up on charges the son of a murdered Armenian journalist in Turkey who was killed earlier this year on charges for publishing his father's words about the genocide. Is that freedom in Turkey to speak out about the genocide not important? Is the freedom of expression, the freedom to talk about some of the darkest chapters in the history of the world not important? Why is freedom in China important, but freedom in Turkey of so little value?
All right. Well, let's say that Turkey does take offense, and they say they will, and they decide to cut off supplies, the supply route. You know, we have an important air base there in Incirlik. If they do decide to cut off supplies to Turkey, are you, as a member of Congress, willing to take responsibility for the consequences of that?
You know, Paul, I think we have to expect that Turkey is going to act in their national interests. They're an important ally to us, and we are an important ally to them. The fact that the European Union wants to make genocide recognition a condition of Turkey getting into the EU hasn't stopped Turkey from wanting to be in the EU. So I have to expect that Turkey is going to act rationally. But I also think, Paul, and maybe you can point to an example of the contrary, that has never been the case that we have served our national interest well by denying the truth, particularly when it involves genocide. And I don't think this is going to be the first time where it was advantageous to our country to deny that truth. At the ceremony yesterday, Elie Wiesel said that speaking truth to power gives power to the truth. That's true with China. It's also true with Turkey. And I think we have to speak that compelling historic truth.
On the other hand,
yes, I have an Armenian community in my district, and I've sat in their living rooms. And I've heard the stories about how their parents and grandparents were wiped out. And you know something, Paul, if it was your parents and your grandparents, you'd be screaming to the rafters that we should recognize what happened to them. And the fact that it was our neighbor's family and not our own shouldn't matter.
Congressman, there's a long list of people on the other side of this, and I would just want to go through it for you. General David Petraeus, as you know, the head of American forces in Iraq. 8 former secretaries of state, including Madeleine Albright. When this issue came up in 2000, President Clinton called the Republican Speaker of the House, then Denny Hastert, and asked him to pull this so it wouldn't compromise our situation in the Middle East. He did. Why shouldn't the Democrats now, at the request of an American president, decide to pull something like this when we are at similar moment?
These 8 secretaries of state you mentioned, this was their policy. They're defending their policy. During those, the administrations of those 8 secretaries, they were willing to deny the genocide. They were willing to be complicit in Turkey's denial. The last president, Paul, who had the courage to recognize the Armenian genocide was President Reagan. And what would you have said to President Reagan, Paul, if you were his advisor? Mr. President, I know you talk about the United States being a moral beacon for the world, but we're in the middle of the Cold War. This will antagonize Turkey. Mr. President, you shouldn't do it. But you know something? Ronald Reagan had the guts to do it. He had the guts to say, no, this country stands for something, and I stand for something. And you know something, Paul? You applaud him for that.
Congressman, what would you...
for having that courage.
Congressman,
why shouldn't we urge this president to have the same courage? He likes to model himself after Ronald Reagan.
Congressman,
all the Republican presidents like to. But let's have the courage that Ronald Reagan had to speak truth to power.
And Congressman, what's your response to David Petraeus, who says this is going to make his mission more difficult to achieve in Iraq?
Well, you know, I respect General Petraeus. I've been to Iraq 3 times. I met him in Mosul on one of my trips there. He's doing his job, and he is, and I think, a very honorable man. His mission is Iraq. When he testified before the Senate and he was asked, is what we're doing in Iraq making our national security better? Is it improving our national security? And you know what he said? I really can't answer that. And the reason he couldn't answer that is his mission is only Iraq. I think if the president needs to look to the greater war on terror and say, what about our moral standing in the world? What role does it have when we espouse truth about history in terms of fighting this ideological struggle in the war on terror? That's not General Petraeus' responsibility. It is the responsibility of the president. I think Ronald Reagan had it right, and I think this president has it wrong.
All right, Congressman, you get the last word. Thanks for being here.
Thank you.